filled with stories, some of which are quite strange. Let's take a closer look into the weird tales of nature. Life as we know it relies upon water. It should come as no surprise, then, that a great many creatures live in the water. Not only in the vast oceans, but also in the smallest pools and streams. However, there are some bodies of water that are less hospitable to life, places where the local chemistry or the local temperatures make life a bit more difficult. A fairly common example of this would be a pool of stagnant water, perhaps associated with a compost pile or maybe a sewer of some kind or another. While such a place is densely inhabited by microbial life, most animal life tends to avoid this relatively hostile environment. Perhaps not surprisingly, some of the more notable inhabitants are certain species of fly. The rat-tailed maggot is the larval form of a fly from the family Syrphidae. Perhaps appropriately, the scientific name can be interpreted as referring to gatherings of refuse. The adult flies are colorful, nimble creatures that superficially resemble wasps. This is most likely as a means of avoiding predation. The maggots of flies typically have a pair of openings at the back of the body that allow them to breathe. Thus, the maggot can be busily feeding, submerged almost entirely in whatever it is eating, while its hindquarters remain in contact with the air to allow it to breathe without needing to pause this feeding. In rat-tailed maggots, this pattern is elaborated upon as the normal pair of openings are set at the end of a long, thin, extensible siphon. Superficially, this siphon resembles the tail of a rat, leading to the common name for these larvae. Depending upon the species, the siphon can often extend to a length several times that of the maggot's body, allowing it to be quite deeply submerged in the foulest of waters. As very few other insects can survive in such a place, these maggots can feed on bacteria and decaying organic matter in relative peace. Another family of flies, the Psychotidae, also have larvae that specialize in inhabiting places of accumulated slime and rot. Some of these flies, commonly called sand flies, have adults that feed on blood and can transmit serious and debilitating diseases in some parts of the world. Another group of these flies, commonly called drain flies, has adults that do not feed on blood and are often found near all sorts of unsanitary places. Their larvae can exist quite happily in the layer of bacterial growth that tends to accumulate down the drains of sinks, showers, bathtubs, and toilets. The adults are tiny, moth-like creatures that are adorably fuzzy and move in a manner reminiscent of little wind-up toys. Unfortunately, these charming little creatures are also rather filthy, considering where they prefer to lay their eggs. While accumulations of filth can certainly render water inhospitable for many forms of life, there are other even more severe conditions found in certain bodies of water. These have nothing to do with the fouling by excesses of organic waste. In some lakes, there is a concentration of salt ions that greatly exceeds that of seawater. Such hypersaline lakes may be highly alkaline in some cases, fairly neutral in others, or rather acidic. Interestingly enough, these waters that are so inimical to most life are often teeming with specialized forms of microbial life. Certain species of extremophile algae and bacteria often thrive in prodigious numbers, sometimes turning the water vivid shades of pink with their collective carotenoid pigments. There are other bodies of water where temperature is the more formidable issue. Geothermal springs often combine high mineral content with scalding heat, scarcely below boiling. Yet here as well, algae and bacteria of different sorts thrive. These temperatures would unravel the enzymes found in most cells, causing them to entirely lose their function as well as their form. In contrast, the enzymes of these microbes are attuned to these high temperatures. In fact, these enzymes would most often cease to function properly in more temperate environments. For these microbes, the world beyond their little steaming oasis is an inhospitable realm of constant hypothermia. The best they might hope for in such a place would be a prolonged sleep in a sort of suspended animation to wait for a return to more comfortable temperatures. While it might not be too surprising to find such extremophiles among the algae, the bacteria, the archaea, there are forms of animal life that also thrive in such environments. Among the most well-known are the brine shrimp. These tiny crustaceans live in many hypersaline lakes, subsisting on the local algae and bacteria. A somewhat more surprising denizen of these lakes would be the flamingos. These birds congregate in great numbers in certain hypersaline environments. There are few predators to be found in such inhospitable places, and as such, they form ideal nesting grounds. There's even an ample supply of food available in the form of all of the various algae and brine shrimp in the salty waters. The pink pigmentation of the algae is transferred to the flamingos as they dine and forms the basis of their own vibrant coloration. Of course, such a lifestyle does have its requirements. The flamingos' long legs keep their feathers well away from the salty waters about them, thus preventing the feathers from being coated in salt crystals over time. There is a gland in the beak that excretes unwanted salt, allowing the flamingos to drink even the hypersaline waters without ill effects. Similar glands are found in seabirds, allowing them to subsist quite happily upon seawater. The flamingo beak is a specialized sieve that allows it to filter the various algae and invertebrates from the water, giving it easy access to the abundant food source. As impressive as these flamingo adaptations are, there is one group of rather small animals that is perhaps supremely adapted to all sorts of inhospitable lakes and springs. This group contains species that thrive in hypersaline lakes, other species that happily inhabit geothermal springs, and still others that live in the most unexpected of puddles. Perhaps it is not surprising that I am referring to yet another family of flies. In this case, I am speaking of the Ephidridae, often referred to as shore flies. The scientific name refers to being found near water, and indeed most of these flies are associated with water in some way or another. Some of these flies are found near seashores, while others favor more inland bodies of water. Some species are common pests in greenhouses, with larvae quietly developing in untended puddles overrun with algal growth. Of course, a few species are specialized to inhabit the more extreme environments. For the moment, let us consider 4 of these species in particular. Ephidra cinerea is commonly known as the brine fly. It exists in considerable numbers in and around the Great Salt Lake in Utah. The larvae look somewhat different to most other maggots, as they have several pairs of stumpy prolegs like those found in caterpillars. They also have a forked appendage at the back of their body, which functions as a pair of breathing siphons not unlike those of the rat-tailed maggot. These brine flies graze on the local algae in the hypersaline waters, both as larvae and as adults. The adults have a covering of fine hairs that are very waxy and highly water repellent. Thus, they can travel under the water while maintaining a small bubble of air around their bodies. This allows them to make regular excursions down to the algal mats to feed. The second species of note is Ephidra hyans, which lives in a manner quite similar to Ephidra cinerea. This fly is commonly known as the alkali fly. It also inhabits the Great Salt Lake, but populations are also found in Mono Lake in California. This lake is not only very salty, but it is also corrosively alkaline. It has been made somewhat famous by the distinctive and rather otherworldly salt accumulations around its shore. The third species is Ephidra brucei. The flies of this species congregate around the warm runoff from hot springs, depositing eggs among the algal mats in the shallow water. While these flies do not live directly in the scalding springs themselves, they do cope with temperatures as high as 45 degrees centigrade, a little over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The strangest and most unique species of intrepid ephidrid is Heliomya petrolii. Roughly translated, the name means the bog fly of oil. This species has the distinction of being the only known insect to inhabit puddles of crude oil. The oddity of this phenomenon is difficult to overstate, as crude oil is normally extraordinarily toxic to insects and quite inimical to most forms of life. First of all, one might ask just where puddles of crude oil might normally be found. In certain parts of California, around the famous La Brea tar pits, crude oil naturally seeps up out of the ground in a few isolated locations. These little pools of oil often trap insects and other small animals, condemning them to an unpleasant death. This is ideal for the petroleum fly larvae. They feed on whatever remains they can find in the black ooze. They also happen to ingest a considerable quantity of oil along the way, apparently without any ill effects. As with the other Ephidridae, these maggots have breathing siphons located at the back of the body, so they come up for air regularly and sometimes swim just below the oil's surface. Only a small pair of indentations gives away their position. It may be worth noting that these maggots are relatively muscular, as it requires a good deal of strength to move through the relatively thick, viscous oil. The adult petroleum flies are unassuming little creatures that are capable of walking on the oil surface without being immediately pulled in. This is in contrast to most insects, where the merest touch is often enough for the hapless creature to be swallowed up. This oil-proofing appears to be confined to the feet of the fly, and so it is still possible for them to occasionally fall prey to the oil as other insects might. If this ever does happen, the larvae at least gain another especially macabre meal. The ephidrid flies, as well as several other families, provide elegant examples of the persistence and tenacity of life. Even complex animal life can exist and thrive in some of the most unexpected and inhospitable of environments. This concludes today's little foray into the unknown. For those who are still curious, here are a few things you might try looking into further. If you found this enjoyable, by all means, say so. If you think others might enjoy this, by all means, share. If you're interested in seeing more of this channel, a subscription should prove quite